On what should have been our 5th wedding anniversary, my 3-year-old daughter, Mia, suddenly came down with a low fever. I immediately called for our family doctor. Dr. Miller examined her thoroughly, her brow furrowed as she clutched the blood test results. She read it over several times before she finally spoke, her voice hesitant. "Mr. Johnson, are you certain that Mia is your biological daughter?" My expression hardened at her words. "Dr. Miller, what are you implying?" Dr. Miller handed the lab report to me, her voice trembling almost imperceptibly. "You and Mrs. Blackwell are both type B, but the child is type A. Biologically, that's simply not possible." I froze, then immediately took Mia to get a rush paternity test. When the words on the report, "no paternal match," seared themselves into my vision, the world spun around me, and all the color drained from my face. My mind flashed back to the day Mia was born, when Sarah was wheeled out of the delivery room, holding a swaddled baby, telling me we had a beautiful daughter. The child I had adored, the one I poured every ounce of my love into, wasn't even mine. Was it possible the hospital had switched the babies? The child Sarah had nearly died to bring into the world, our biological child. Where was she now? And what about Sarah? Did she know about this? I was the sole heir to the Johnson Corporation, a man who had wanted for nothing his entire life. All of New York City knew how relentlessly Sarah had pursued me, acting as if she would pluck the stars from the sky just to lay them at my feet. We had lost a child before Mia, a stillbirth that had devastated us. That's why we cherished our second chance so much. She would never allow our own flesh and blood to be replaced by some stranger's baby. I had to find her right now and tell her what I'd discovered. Suppressing the storm of emotions raging inside me, I told the driver to take Mia home while I drove to the private club where Sarah was supposed to be for a business meeting. Halfway there, my path was blocked by a loud commotion. 2 groups were brawling in the street, a chaotic mess of flailing limbs and shouts. I had no interest in the spectacle and was about to turn around when my eyes locked onto a woman at the edge of the fray, her movements frantic and wild. Her expensive Chanel suit was torn, her hair a mess, and a fresh scratch marred her cheek as she viciously pulled at another woman's hair, screaming with a ferocity I had never witnessed. That raw, unhinged state was completely alien to me. The woman was none other than my wife, Sarah, who had always been the picture of grace and composure. If I hadn't seen it for myself, I would never have believed she was capable of such a display. A few of her friends who had heard the commotion finally managed to pull Sarah away. I got out of my car, following them at a distance. "Sarah, Ethan was just talking to someone in the hallway," one of her friends said, exasperated. "Was it really worth starting a full-blown brawl over?" "Exactly," another chimed in. "Remember when Daniel was insulted at that charity gala? You found out it was one of the Carter boys and just made him get on his knees and apologize. You didn't fly off the handle like this. Besides, what if you go home looking like a mess and scare Mia? What are you going to say if Daniel asks what happened?" "He won't," Sarah cut in, her voice fiercely protective. "Mia is mine and Ethan's biological daughter. If she knew her mother got hurt defending her real father, she'd be thrilled." Someone beside her nodded in agreement. "She started to look more and more like Ethan as she gets older." I stood frozen, as if struck by lightning, the blood in my veins turning to ice. I thought I must be mishearing things, that it was some kind of horrible auditory hallucination. But Sarah's next words shoved me into the abyss. It was my fault. I was overcome with passion, and Ethan and I had Mia, she confessed. He never asked for anything, and even suggested we hide her true parentage. I've always felt like I owed Ethan. She paused, her voice dropping lower. Now, all I can do is try my best to make it up to both of them. So that was the truth. My eyes blurred with tears before I could stop them. The daughter I had cherished, my precious little girl, was the child of my wife and another man. 7 years ago, I was critically ill and needed an emergency transfusion, but the hospital's blood bank was running low. Ethan, who was just an employee of mine at the time, stepped up and donated his blood. To show my gratitude for saving my life, I gave him a substantial amount of money and came to see him as one of my closest friends. Sarah, also grateful, often helped him out professionally. I never imagined their gratitude would evolve into a secret affair, let alone result in them swapping my child for theirs. The most laughable part is that I never suspected a thing. I trusted Ethan completely and believed Sarah was the perfect wife. One of her friends pressed, "But what about Daniel? What if he finds out someday?" Sarah's lips curled into a confident smile, her tone unwavering. I will continue to love Daniel, just as I always have. He'll never suspect a thing. Just make sure you all keep your mouths shut about the baby, she warned them. With that, she pulled out her phone, expertly navigated to my contact, and her tone shifted into something soft and intimate. Daniel, something urgent came up with the project. I have to go out of town for a few days, but I'll be back soon. Miss you. Wait for me. Standing just yards away, I heard those familiar, loving words and felt a sickening chill creep over my skin, my chest tightening until it was hard to breathe. Her messages used to fill me with such warmth. But now, I could only stare at the disheveled woman who had just been brawling in the street for another man. I glanced down at her profile picture pulsing on my screen as 1,000 tiny needles of pain pricked my heart. My Sarah, the woman who had been known in our circles as the Wild Rose. She used to cycle through boyfriends as if they were seasonal fashions, never settling down. And yet, at a business gala, she'd seen me sitting quietly in a corner and, as she told it, fallen in love at first sight, launching an intense, all-out pursuit. For my sake, she'd tamed her wild side, trading late nights at bars for quiet evenings and checking in with me constantly. She canceled plans to join me at art galleries and bookstores, once even waiting outside my apartment until the early morning hours just to bring me a pastry I had mentioned in passing. I, the object of this intense affection, found myself sinking deeper and deeper into her tenderness until we were married. 4 or 5 years, we were the couple everyone envied, the picture of marital bliss. People always said I was the one who had finally tamed her. It turns out, she had only moored in my harbor for a little while. Her heart had always belonged to another ocean. The pain was like a knife twisting in my gut. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached, my nails digging into my palms as my trembling fingers opened our iMessage thread. Today is our 5th anniversary. Can you please wait to leave until after today? I typed a final, desperate test. If Sarah would just stay, if she would explain the scratch on her face and confess everything she'd been hiding, I could walk away quietly, preserving the Blackwell family's reputation. Her reply came almost instantly. Daniel, this project is critical to the company. I promise I'll make it up to you when I get back. I stared at the cold, impersonal words on my screen, then at her retreating back. A bitter smile touched my lips, and the last flicker of hope in my eyes died out. So her affection and her promises weren't just for me. She could split her love, her very heart, in two. Sarah, how could your heart possibly hold 2 different men? I turned and fled back to my car, a desperate retreat from the wreckage of my life. Leaning my head back against the driver's seat, I let the tears I'd been holding back finally fall. After a long moment, I opened my eyes, a cold, hard resolve settling in their depths. This daughter that I had poured my heart and soul into raising, I was done with her. And I was done with Sarah, the liar. If Ethan was her one true love, and Mia was the product of that love, then I would grant them their wish. Taking a deep breath, I wiped the tears from my face and started the engine. The first thing I did when I got back into the city was call my assistant. My voice was eerily calm, devoid of any emotion. Inform headquarters that I've decided to accept the position overseeing the international branch. I didn't go back to that house, that monument to my own foolishness. Instead, I turned the car around and drove straight to the old Blackwell family estate. When I walked into the living room, Sarah's mother looked up, surprised to see me. Daniel, what brings you here so late? Isn't Sarah with you? I need to talk to you about something important, I said, sitting down across from her. I pulled 2 documents from my briefcase and placed them gently on the coffee table between us. One was a set of divorce papers. The other was the paternity test. The polite smile on Mrs. Blackwell's face vanished the moment her eyes fell on the words, "No paternal match." Her voice trembled as she looked at me. Daniel, what in the world is going on? My voice was terrifyingly calm. It's exactly what it looks like. Mia is not my daughter. She's Sarah's and Ethan Reed's. What? Mrs. Blackwell shot to her feet, slamming her hand on the table, her chest heaving with rage. I'm calling her this instant. She's going to come here and explain herself to you, right now. Please don't, I said softly, stopping her. I pushed the divorce papers a little further across the table, my eyes filled with nothing but weariness. I'm not here for an explanation. I'm here to ask you for one thing. Please, find a way to get Sarah to sign these papers. Just let me be free. Mrs. Blackwell stood and took my cold hands in hers, her voice thick with emotion. Daniel, I know that anything I say now will sound like a hollow excuse. But for the past 5 years, I have seen everything you've done for this family. When you were first married and Sarah would come home late from parties, you never complained. You'd just leave a light on and have soup waiting for her. When I was in the hospital 2 years ago, you ran yourself ragged between the office and my bedside, losing so much weight without a single word of complaint. She looked at my pale, unnervingly calm face, and her own expression was one of agony. Mrs. Blackwell knew my nature. I was gentle, but I was also decisive. Once my heart was truly broken, there was no mending it. The Blackwell family has failed you. Sarah was a blind fool to do this to you. Her tears finally fell. How could she treat you with such contempt? I listened quietly, leaving my hands in hers, but my gaze remained distant and unmoved. There was only the profound silence of a heart that had already died. Mrs. Blackwell finally understood that nothing she could say would change anything. With a trembling hand, she gathered the papers from the table. She took a deep breath, each word weighing a ton. "All right, Daniel, I promise you, the Blackwell family will make this right." Over the next few days, I went to work as usual, calmly arranging all the details of the handover to the international branch, acting as if nothing was wrong. But I was the only one who knew how, in the dead of night, the gnawing sense of betrayal consumed me, an agony that was almost physical. The day after my visit to the Blackwell estate, a file appeared in my inbox from an anonymous email address. I had a sinking feeling as I clicked it open. Inside was a collection of photos and short video clips taken from various angles. They were all time-stamped within the last couple of days. Sarah's urgent business trip was nothing more than a cover for spending time with Ethan right here in New York. One photo showed them sharing an intimate dinner at an exclusive restaurant. She was carefully placing food on his plate, her expression soft and loving. A short video clip showed them strolling through a high-end children's boutique, with Ethan holding up a tiny dress for her approval. She smiled, nodded, and casually wrapped an arm around his waist. There was even one blurry, long-distance shot of them outside a private clinic. Ethan had his hand protectively on Sarah's arm, guiding her carefully. Mia was nowhere in sight. So this was her idea of making it up to them. While I was being torn apart by the truth, she was calmly and happily spending her days with another man. I locked myself in my study and, in an act of pure self-torture, forced myself to watch the images again and again. The first time, the pain was so sharp I could barely breathe, tears of betrayal streaming down my face. The second time, a wave of nauseating anger washed over me. By the third and fourth viewings, the sharp pain had dulled to a numb, chilling coldness. On the fifth day, as I mechanically clicked open the files one last time, I felt nothing at all. Every last ember of love I had for her had been extinguished, leaving behind nothing but cold, dead ash. It was on that same day that I received a message from my assistant. Sarah was back from her trip. Sarah swept into my office without knocking, laden with shopping bags from several high-end boutiques. She wore that smile I knew so well, the one she always used when she was trying to smooth things over. "Daniel, darling, did you miss me?" She spread her arms, moving to embrace me. I looked up, my gaze resting on her, completely devoid of emotion. I continued to sort through the overseas market analysis report in my hands, a key document for my transition. 3 years ago, Sarah had convinced me to join her family's company as the VP of marketing, citing that we were a team. I'd worked out of this office for 3 years, conquering new markets for her, for the Blackwell Corporation. Looking back, it all felt like an elaborate trap. My movements didn't falter as I gave a non-committal Sarah's arms froze halfway to my shoulders, the smile on her face faltering for a fraction of a second. She obviously hadn't registered the significance of the documents I was holding, assuming it was just routine paperwork. Or perhaps the thought that I would ever leave her company had never crossed her mind. She nonchalantly lowered her arms, placing the shopping bags on the corner of my desk. "Look what I brought you," she said, her voice shifting into that familiar, indulgent tone. "I know it was wrong of me to be away on our anniversary, so these are for you." She picked up an orange box. "The new Hermes loafers, in that color you liked. I had to wait a month for them." When I didn't even look up, she opened a velvet jewelry case and slid it across the desk toward me. "A Graf diamond watch from their most popular collection. I remember you saying you liked it." Finally, she set a Porsche key fob down beside the box. "It's for the new limited edition. It's white, your color." My eyes finally drifted over the expensive peace offerings. In the past, this kind of grand gesture would have melted my resolve. Now, all I saw were price tags, each one a desperate attempt to put a value on the lie she was trying to conceal. Just then, a soft knock sounded at the door. Before I could answer, Ethan Reed pushed it open and walked in, holding a folder. Ethan, the man I had brought into the company out of gratitude, was now Sarah's executive assistant, a position of considerable influence. "Sarah." "Daniel," he said with a polite smile, his eyes widening in exaggerated awe as he took in the gifts on my desk. "Wow, Sarah, you really spoil him. Look at all this." Sarah offered him a faint smile, but didn't spare him another glance. She moved to my side and reached for my arm again, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "Daniel, please. Look how sorry I am. Can you just forgive me this once?" Just before her hand could touch me, I subtly shifted to grab another file from my desk, neatly avoiding her contact. My eyes grazed the side of her face. The faint scratch from her brawl was now almost invisible. If I hadn't already known what she'd been up to, I never would have noticed. A sharp pain lanced through me. How many other secrets had she kept over the years? The last-minute canceled dates, the sudden, urgent meetings. All the excuses I had accepted without a second thought now seemed laughably transparent. "She's right, Daniel," Ethan added, stepping closer, his eyes fixed on the diamond watch with unconcealed envy. "That's a limited edition graph. It's incredible." Sarah ignored Ethan, her attention focused solely on me, waiting. In my presence, she was careful to maintain the illusion of a professional relationship with Ethan. But the images from the email flashed in my mind. Her restraint now was just a mask for a deeper layer of deceit. I finally spoke, my voice flat. "Just leave the folder on the desk, Ethan. I need to prep for a meeting, so I'll need some quiet." The message was unmistakable. "Get out." The smile on Ethan's face faltered for a second before he recovered. "Of course," he said. He placed the folder on my desk, and for a fleeting moment, his eyes met Sarah's with a look of subtle, wounded complaint. Sarah stepped in, seemingly to smooth things over. "Ethan, why don't you get back to your work? Let Daniel have a moment." Ethan gave a compliant nod and left. Though Sarah remained by my side, I saw her eyes follow his retreating figure down the hall. My stomach churned. I thought back to all the times the three of us had been together, at dinners or company events. Sarah and Ethan had always had so much to talk about. I'd always dismissed it as them having shared interests, a good working relationship. Now I saw it for what it was. It wasn't a professional camaraderie. It was the subtle language of lovers. My heart felt like it was sinking into a bucket of ice water, the cold so intense it made me tremble. The signs of her betrayal had been there all along, but I had been a fool, blinded by what I thought was love. Sarah started to speak again, but I cut her off by gathering my files and my laptop. "I have to get to that meeting," I said, standing up. Without another glance at her, I walked to the door and pulled it open. As it clicked shut behind me, I thought I heard her let out a soft, frustrated sigh. That sound, which once would have made my heart ache for her, now felt like another needle twisting in my gut. I leaned against the cool wall in the hallway, fighting back a wave of physical nausea. After a few moments, I pulled out my phone. With cold precision, I accessed the live feed from the security camera in my office. On the screen, Ethan, who had just made his obedient exit, was now back inside my office. Sarah walked swiftly to the door and bolted it from the inside. Ethan's eyes swept over the gifts on my desk, a bitter edge to his voice. "You really spare no expense for him, do you? Is there anything for me?" Sarah let out a low laugh, pulling a small velvet box from the inside pocket of her blazer. "How could I ever forget you? This was made just for you. There isn't another one like in the world." He took the box, his face lighting up as he saw the pair of exquisite, custom diamond cufflinks inside. He immediately pulled her into a tight embrace, his voice soft. "Silly Sarah, you're all I need." Another spike of ice drove through my heart. For me, store-bought luxuries. For Ethan, something unique, something priceless. In her heart, that was the difference between us. On the screen, the two of them held each other in a tight embrace. I couldn't tell who initiated it, but suddenly their lips were locked together, a gentle kiss quickly escalating into something far more desperate. With a sweep of his arm, Ethan sent my gifts crashing to the floor. Then he lifted Sarah and set her down on my desk. A soft moan escaped Sarah's lips as her arms snaked around his neck. The only sound in the office was their ragged, desperate breaths. I stared at the screen, my fingernails digging so deep into my palms that they should have drawn blood, but I felt nothing. Sarah was in my office, with another man, turning my workspace into the stage for their sordid affair. The passion she had once reserved only for me now ate away at my heart like acid. I slammed the phone off. If I watched a second longer, I was afraid I'd storm in there and destroy them both. But that wasn't who I was. I turned and walked away, putting distance between myself and that suffocating room. When I got home later that evening, Sarah was already in the kitchen, apron tied neatly, wearing the same gentle expression I had once found so captivating. "You're back," she said brightly. "Wash up. Dinner's almost ready." Looking at her effortless smile, I could only marvel at what a consummate actress she was. At the table, she thoughtfully put food on my plate, but I barely tasted it, offering only mumbled, one-word replies. After dinner, her arm slid around my waist, her warm palm caressing my side with clear intent. I went rigid, instantly standing up to pull away from her touch. Sarah froze. "Daniel." I fought back the rising bile in my throat, forcing my voice to sound even. "Mia's birthday is coming up. I'm going to go ask her what kind of party she wants." Before she could respond, I turned and walked quickly toward her room. When I opened the door, Mia was sitting on the carpet, completely absorbed in a cartoon puzzle. She looked up when I came in, her little voice sweet and high. "Daddy, can you help Mia? I can't do this part." I walked over and took the puzzle pieces she offered. I looked into Mia's innocent, wide eyes, and for the first time, I saw the resemblance to Ethan Reed in the curve of her eyebrows, the shape of her eyes. It felt like an invisible hand was squeezing my heart, a suffocating pain spreading through my chest. This was the child I had loved down to my bones, the one I had poured all my paternal love into. And now, she was living, breathing proof of my wife's betrayal, a constant, daily reminder of my own foolishness. I lowered my gaze to hide the torment in my eyes, and sat beside her, silently fitting the pieces into place. "Mia," I began, my voice hoarse, "your birthday is almost here. Is there anyone special you want to invite to your party?" At this, Mia's eyes lit up. "I want Uncle Ethan to come," she exclaimed. "Daddy, can we invite Uncle Ethan, please? I love Uncle Ethan the most." A dull, heavy blow landed on my chest, knocking the air from my lungs. I forced a gentle tone. "Oh, and why do you like Uncle Ethan so much?" "Because he's the nicest to me," Mia said, starting to count on her little fingers. "Last week, Mommy and Uncle Ethan took me to the amusement park. He bought me the biggest cotton candy, and he went on the airplane ride with me. We went so high. And the time we went to the aquarium, Mommy carried me, and Uncle Ethan held my hand, and we saw all the pretty fishes. He said he's going to take me to play all the time and buy me lots and lots of dresses and dolls." Every word was a poisoned dagger twisting in my gut. The amusement park, the aquarium, Mommy carried me, and Uncle Ethan held my hand. What a perfect picture of a happy family. So while I was pulling all-nighters at the office, working myself to the bone for the Blackwell Corporation, they were behind my back, playing house, forming their own happy little family. And I, the supposed father, was just the clueless fool raising another man's child for them. Looking at Mia's excited face, it all suddenly made sense. Why she had always been so naturally drawn to Ethan. Why Ethan always looked at her with that strange, secret possessiveness in his eyes. I reached out and gently stroked her soft hair. "All right," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Daddy understands." On the day of Mia's birthday party, the Blackwell mansion was transformed into a fairy tale castle. Ethan arrived, conspicuously dressed in an all-white tuxedo. He carried an ornate pet carrier over to Mia and opened it to reveal a fluffy, snow-white ragdoll kitten. "Happy birthday, Mia," Ethan said, his voice soft. "Look what Uncle Ethan brought you." Mia squealed with delight, pulling the tiny cat into her arms and burying her face in its soft fur. "Thank you, Uncle Ethan. Kittens are my favorite." I stepped forward, my brow furrowed. I didn't look at Mia, but instead offered Ethan a perfectly pleasant smile. "How thoughtful of you. But perhaps next time you should consider the host before choosing a gift. My severe cat allergy is hardly a secret. Were you truly unaware, or was this intentional?" My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Several nearby guests turned to look at Ethan, their expressions shifting to ones of knowing amusement. The color drained from Ethan's face. I had no idea," he stammered. "Daniel, I'm so sorry." My smile never wavered. I turned to the butler. "Mr. Roberts, please remove this gift and find a suitable place for it elsewhere. We wouldn't want Mr. Reed's thoughtfulness to become a disruption to the party. Mia immediately hid behind Sarah, clutching the kitten to her chest. "No, it's my birthday, and I want the kitty," she cried. Watching her fiercely protect the cat, the last embers of warmth in my heart turned to ash. It made sense. My daughter, just like my wife, preferred Ethan. All those miserable times she'd seen me gasping for breath, covered in hives from an allergic reaction, apparently meant less to her than this cat. I ignored Mia's protests and had the kitten taken away. The party was soon in full swing, the house filled with guests. Suddenly, Sarah picked up a microphone and cleared her throat, signaling for quiet. A spotlight found her, and she smiled down at the crowd, her face a mask of loving indulgence. "Thank you all so much for coming to celebrate my little Mia's birthday. Watching her grow has been the greatest joy of my life. But there's someone else whose love and devotion to Mia has been just as profound as my own, and that is Ethan Reed." She gestured for Ethan to join her at the front of the room. He played his part perfectly, his eyes wide with feigned surprise, the rims slightly red as if he were overcome with emotion. Sarah turned back to the guests, her voice firm and clear. "Ethan loves Mia as if she were his own, and she adores him. So today, with all of you as our witnesses, I have decided to officially make Ethan Mia's godfather. It is my hope that their bond will only deepen, and it is my special birthday gift to my daughter." The room burst into thunderous applause. Ethan produced a small, ornate box and, with a gentle smile, fastened a solid gold locket he'd clearly prepared in advance around Mia's neck. "My sweet girl," he said softly, "a gift from your godfather." Mia beamed, touching the locket before throwing her arms around Ethan's neck and kissing his cheek. "Thank you, godfather. I love you the most." It was a touching scene. And so, in front of all of New York's high society, my wife and the girl I thought was my daughter performed this moving ceremony with another man. I, her actual father, was reduced to a superfluous spectator. A little girl from the crowd ran up. "Mia, if you have a godfather now, what about your real daddy?" Mia pouted. "He never plays with me. My godfather is the best. He said he'll play with me every single day and take me to Disney World." My heart clenched in my chest. I thought of all the times I'd forced myself to let her stand on her own 2 feet, fighting the urge to pick her up when she fell, so she would learn to be independent. I remembered my own birthday last year, when I dragged myself out of bed with a high fever just to be there when she blew out her candles, because I'd promised I would never miss a single milestone. I thought of all the late-night video calls from business trips, just to hear her sleepy little voice say "Daddy." I had always been the strict parent, the one pushing her to be strong and self-reliant. But the Blackwells spoiled her rotten, and my role as the disciplinarian had only made me seem cold and unloving in her eyes. I always believed that one day she would understand my intentions. Instead, all I got was, "He never plays with me." Just then, Sarah appeared before me, a wine glass in her hand, finally remembering the forgotten man in the corner. She leaned in close, her voice a low murmur only I could hear. "Daniel, don't be mad that I didn't tell you first. You could see how much Mia adores Ethan. I just wanted to do something to make her happy. As her father, you should be a little more gracious." I met her gaze, my own eyes cold as ice, and I raised my voice so those nearby could hear. "Well, now that Mr. Reed is Mia's godfather, I trust he'll be taking his new responsibility seriously. A godfather is a father figure, after all. It can all be fun and games. A child in our family needs lessons, tutoring, etiquette training. I'll leave all that hard work to him. I just hope he puts more thought into it than he did with his gift." My words put Ethan directly in a hot seat. If he agreed, he'd be saddled with a host of difficult, thankless tasks. If he refused, he'd be admitting in front of everyone that his affection for Mia was purely superficial. The smile froze on Ethan's face, and he was rendered speechless. Sarah's expression darkened, but she was in no position to object. I pretended not to notice the silent, panicked conversation passing between their eyes. The MC called me to the stage to give a host remarks. I took a deep breath, pushing down the storm of emotion inside me, trying to salvage one last shred of dignity. But as I pushed myself to my feet, a loud, unmistakable ripping sound echoed through the quiet room. I froze. The back of my dress shirt had been torn open, a long, gaping rip from my shoulder blade all the way down to my waist. A wave of gasps and shocked whispers rippled through the crowd. "My God, his shirt is completely ripped. You'd think the Blackwells could afford a decent tailor. How utterly humiliating. I stood frozen, not needing to see the damage to know exactly how pathetic I looked. I glanced up and caught the look of ill-concealed triumph in Ethan's eyes. Of course, I didn't scurry away in shame, as everyone expected. Instead, I calmly held the torn fabric together, straightened my spine, and walked steadily to the podium, my shoes clicking sharply on the marble floor. I took the microphone, my voice perfectly clear and composed when I spoke. My apologies for the interruption. It seems there's been a little incident. My shirt has been deliberately vandalized, an act I consider to be a profound personal insult. I will find out who is responsible for this attempt to humiliate me at my own daughter's party. The room erupted in a fresh wave of murmurs. Ethan's composure flickered for a second before he schooled his features into an expression of concern. Sarah rushed to my side. "Daniel, don't make a scene," she hissed. "It's just a shirt. I'll have someone bring you another one." I looked directly at her, my voice booming through the microphone. "And being publicly humiliated is a better look? I'm sorry, my dear, but we disagree. In fact, to get to the bottom of this, I've already called the police." Sarah's face went grim. "Are you determined to make our family the laughingstock of New York?" "I'm not the one turning us into a joke," I said, my gaze sweeping over to Ethan. "The person responsible for that is the one who resorts to petty, backstabbing tricks. Isn't that right, Mr. Reed?" My implication was clear, and all eyes in the room swung to him. Ethan quickly looked down. "Daniel, what are you suggesting? I know you've never been happy about my relationship with Mia, but you can't just falsely accuse me." He looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I only wanted Mia to have a happy birthday." Mia ran over and stood in front of Ethan, her small face contorted with anger. "You mean, Daddy? My godfather was with me the whole time, helping me with my surprise. He didn't do anything." Sarah moved to shield Ethan, her voice sharp. "Daniel, that is enough. This is your daughter's birthday party, not your personal stage for settling scores. Look at the spectacle you're making." I took in the scene before me. My wife protecting her lover, my daughter glaring at me with pure hatred, the guests watching with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The entire situation was so absurd it was almost funny. Just then, the police arrived. I calmly explained the situation and requested they review the security footage. The cameras, however, confirmed that for the entire half hour leading up to my speech, Ethan had been with Sarah and Mia. He had a perfect alibi. Mia burst into tears. "See, Daddy was just being mean to my godfather. I hate you, Daddy." The tide of public opinion turned swiftly. The pity in the guest's eyes was replaced with disapproval. "Well, that was uncalled for. He clearly ripped it by accident and tried to blame an innocent man. I guess the rumors about their marriage are true after all." The police took their notes and left, tactfully suggesting this was a private family matter. Sarah addressed the remaining guests. "I'm so sorry for all this. My husband has been under a great deal of stress at work lately, and he hasn't been himself. I think it's best we call a night. I will be in touch to make it up to all of you." The party broke up unceremoniously. I stood frozen, watching Sarah gently console Ethan, watching Mia cling tightly to his hand. And then I understood. That perfect alibi hadn't been a coincidence. Sarah had manufactured it, using herself and our daughter as cover. In that moment, I felt my heart being ripped in two, but it was too numb to even bleed. The agony of the past week had deadened it completely. The guests were gone. The grand ballroom, now a wreck of half-eaten cake and discarded decorations, was deathly silent. Sarah wordlessly shrugged off her jacket, tossing it onto a sofa with contained fury. She kicked off her heels and finally turned her icy gaze on me. "Are you satisfied now, Daniel?" Her voice was a low hiss, each word dripping with venom. "Turning Mia's birthday into a public spectacle, a complete farce. Is this what you wanted?" Ethan gently tugged on her sleeve. "Sarah, don't blame him. It's all my fault. I never should have come. I just wanted Mia to be happy. I never dreamed it would turn into this." Sarah immediately turned to him, her voice softening instantly. "It's not your fault, Ethan. Don't even think that." When she turned back to me, her face was an open mask of irritation. "What is your problem? Was a torn shirt really worth calling the police? Do you have any idea how bad it looks for the Blackwell family to have cops show up at our door?" Her voice rose with every word. "When did you become so irrational? Humiliating Ethan, ruining Mia's party. Did you even stop to think how this would affect her?" She was terrified. The accusations rained down on me, like hailstones. I looked at her furious, righteous face. She wasn't just an accomplice. She was the mastermind. She knew the truth and still had the audacity to blame me. I had nothing left to say. My silence only seemed to fuel her rage. She saw it as defiance. She stepped forward and grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at her. Daniel, Ethan is Mia's godfather, and he's the man who saved your life. I forbid you from ever targeting him again, and you're going to apologize to him for what you did today. My gaze was vacant, looking right through her, as if she wasn't there. The sharp, antiseptic smell of the hospital from 7 years ago suddenly filled my senses. I saw myself lying in that bed, watching Ethan roll up his sleeve. I remembered holding his hand, my voice thick with emotion as I said, "Thank you for saving my life." Ethan had smiled gently. "Don't say that, Daniel. It was the least I could do." Who could have known that this single act of kindness would become the foundation of his entire scheme? He used it to get close to Sarah, using my own gratitude as the perfect camouflage. My fingers dug into my palms, but I felt nothing. "Mean Daddy," Mia's shrill voice snapped me back to the present. She pulled away from Sarah, her face a mask of pure disgust directed at me. "Why were you so mean to my godfather? You ruined my whole party. I hate you." There is no grief greater than a dead heart. Now I finally understood what that meant. Sarah watched her daughter's outburst, a frown creasing her brow, but it quickly resolved into a contemptuous sniff. "You see, even a child can tell who's right and who's wrong here. Daniel, you need to take a long, hard look at yourself." With that, she turned her back on me, taking a furious Mia and a wronged Ethan with her toward the door. "I'm just going to walk Ethan out," she announced. The front door opened and slammed shut. I don't know how much time passed before she returned, Mia trailing behind her, still fuming. Sarah walked into the living room, pointedly ignoring me. Finally, Mia made her move. I was pouring a glass of water, and she shoved me hard. "Go away. I don't want to see you. I want my godfather." The glass tipped, and hot water sloshed over the back of my hand, but I barely registered the burn. My voice was quiet, eerily calm, as if I were discussing a matter of complete indifference. "Don't you worry," I said. My words meant as much for Sarah as for Mia. "Soon enough, Ethan will be the only father you have." Without waiting for a reaction, I turned and walked to the master bedroom. The click of the door shutting behind me was loud and final. Lying in the empty guest room, the world spun around me. The weight of everything finally dragged me down into a heavy sleep, but my mind found no rest, only nightmares. I was outside the delivery room again, the overpowering smell of antiseptic choking the air. I was standing in a hall, drenched in a cold sweat, Sarah's agonized screams threatening to shatter my eardrums. A nurse's voice seemed to float from a great distance. "It's a healthy girl." And then, at last, the sound I'd been waiting for, a baby's cry. I lifted my head, trying to see my daughter's face. But my vision was filled with the sight of Ethan Reed, standing at the foot of the bed, holding the swaddled baby and smiling directly at me. "My baby," I croaked, my hand shooting out, grasping at empty air. Suddenly, the overhead lights began to flicker violently, twisting Ethan's smiling face into a grotesque mask. I jolted awake, my heart hammering against my ribs, my pajamas soaked through with a cold sweat. Before I could even catch my breath, the door to my room was thrown open. Sarah strode in and hauled me out of bed. "Get up," she commanded, her voice devoid of any warmth. I stumbled out of bed, my body weak and trembling. A high fever blurred my vision, making each step feel like I was walking on clouds. Sarah didn't spare me a single glance as she stormed out of the room ahead of me. She led me to Mia's room and stopped, stepping aside to reveal the scene within. My breath hitched. The little white kitten lay dead and stiff on Mia's bed, a vicious gash in its neck soaking the white sheets with a startling crimson stain. Mia was huddled in a corner, hugging her knees, so terrified she was trembling uncontrollably, utterly unresponsive. "Did you do this?" Sarah's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a poisoned dagger. I slowly raised my head, meeting her gaze directly. "No, I have a fever. I haven't left my room since last night." She just stared at me, her eyes cold and clinical, as if she were examining a defective product. Finally, she spoke, her voice chillingly certain. "You were the only person on this floor last night. The staff confirmed it." Her voice dripped with condescension. "Daniel, I am so disappointed in you." First you falsely accuse Ethan, and now this, killing a kitten. When is this behavior going to stop? I felt my heart crack. After 5 years of marriage, this is what she thought of me. A man capable of slaughtering a kitten in a fit of pique. She took another step closer. Daniel, you're not well. I've already contacted Dr. Miller. She's the best therapist in the city. You need help. Hystéria, incredulous. You think I'm crazy? I think you need help, she said, her tone stating it as a simple, undeniable fact. And while you're getting the help, for your own safety and for ours, you'll be confined to your room. And then I understood. This wasn't a conversation. It was a sentencing. Sarah turned to the butler. Escort my husband back to his room. From now on, he is not to leave it for any reason without my express permission. I let out a low, bitter laugh, a sound filled with the sharpest irony. Then I straightened my back and walked, under my own power, back to my room. The moment I heard the lock turn, my strength gave out. I slid down the cool wood of the door until I was sitting on the floor. My forehead was burning with fever, but it was nothing compared to the frozen, dead weight of the heart in my chest. I pushed myself up, staggering over to the bed to retrieve the laptop I had hidden under the covers. For the next 3 days, I was a model patient. I was calm, cooperative, and answered all of Dr. Miller's questions with placid indifference. The so-called therapy sessions were torture, the electric shocks leaving me disoriented and dazed. But in the moments of clarity that followed, my resolve only hardened, my heart turning to ice. I had Sarah to thank for her cruelty. It had severed the last, lingering thread of affection I might have had for her. I worked without sleep, using every available second to finalize the handover. Finally, it was done. On my last day of captivity, I stood at the window, tying the rope I'd fashioned from my bedsheets to the sturdy frame. Without a moment's hesitation, I swung myself out the window. After I landed on the soft grass below, I took one last look at the house that had once been my home, the place I had filled with so much hope and love. When I turned away, my eyes were clear and empty. At dawn, I stood in the departure lounge at JFK. Through the massive windows, I watched the plane that would take me away from this life being prepped for takeoff. I took out my phone, popped out the SIM card, and dropped it into the nearest trash can. The boarding announcement flashed on the terminal screen. I picked up my carry-on and walked toward the gate without a backward glance. Outside my window, New York City, the gilded cage that had held me for 5 long years, grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared. I closed my weary eyes and let out a long, slow breath. It was finally over. Sarah was at an indoor playground at the mall, watching Ethan and Mia play. Mia was shrieking with laughter, and Ethan watched her with a look of pure, blissful contentment. It was the perfect picture of a happy family, the one she had always secretly wanted. But for some reason, looking at Ethan's smiling face, the image that kept flashing in her mind was of Daniel, sitting quietly by the window with a book, bathed in afternoon light. A sudden, inexplicable emptiness opened up inside her, and she felt a tremor of panic. She realized it had been days since she'd even seen Daniel. A strange, unsettling restlessness took hold of her. Ethan, ever perceptive, noticed her distraction. "Sarah? What's wrong?" he asked gently. Sarah snapped back to the present, forcing her attention back to Ethan and Mia. "It's nothing," she said, but it was a lie. She couldn't focus. It had been days, and she hadn't heard a single thing from Daniel. Locked up for days, forced to see a therapist, a man as proud as Daniel had to be furious. She frowned. Had she gone too far? But then she remembered his recent behavior. He had been completely out of line. Accusing Ethan, ruining his own daughter's birthday party, killing that poor cat. Getting him professional help and limiting his movements was for his own good, a chance for him to calm down before he did something even worse. Still, he was so stubborn. He was definitely angry. An image of Daniel's eyes flashed in her mind. They had once been so full of love for her, but the last time she'd seen him, they were just cold and exhausted. A sharp, needle-like pain pricked at her heart. Whatever. It wasn't worth fighting about. No matter how much he was in the wrong. He was still her husband, the man she had sworn to spend her life with. She'd just have to humor him. With that thought, Sarah couldn't stay put any longer. "Ethan, you stay here with Mia," she said, standing up. "I have to run home for a bit." The smile on Ethan's face froze, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes before he quickly masked it. "Of course, Sarah. You go do what you need to do." But Mia ran over and clung to her leg. "Mommy, where are you going? Aren't you going to play with me and Godfather?" Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, her voice softening. Mommy's just going home to check on Daddy. At the word Daddy, Mia's lip jutted out. Daddy's mean, she mumbled. He was mean to my godfather, and he ruined my party. Sarah frowned, but before she could say anything, Mia looked down at the floor, her voice barely a whisper. But Mommy, I still miss him. He was really mean, but he's my daddy. Her daughter's innocent words were like a key, unlocking a floodgate of memories she hadn't realized she'd closed off. She remembered when Mia was born, how clumsy and unsure Daniel had been, but how he'd insisted on holding her, his eyes overflowing with a tenderness and awe that had taken her breath away. She remembered Mia's first fever, how Daniel had stayed up all night, never leaving her crib. She remembered him patiently holding Mia's hands as she took her first steps, his delight at her first words. All these moments she'd taken for granted were now replaying in her mind with searing clarity. Hearing her daughter's words, the unease in Sarah's heart grew into a raging wildfire. She couldn't stand it another second. She practically bolted from the play area. I have to go. She sped home, a nameless panic clawing at her throat. She slammed the car to a stop in the driveway and bolted out, not even bothering to close the door behind her as she ran up the steps and threw open the front door. The living room was empty, the silence deafening. Daniel, she called out, her voice unnaturally loud in the still house. No one answered. She ran to the guest room and threw open the door. The curtains were drawn, casting the room in shadow. The bed was made with military precision, the sheets smooth and undisturbed. The crisp, clean scent of his cologne that usually lingered in the air was almost completely gone. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, staring into the room that no longer held any trace of him, her heart plummeting. He was gone. Then her eyes locked on the open window, and on the makeshift rope, fashioned from knotted bed sheets, dangling from the sill. A surge of fury mixed with a chilling dread washed over her. It was a two-story drop. Did he have a death wish? If he had slipped, she couldn't bear to finish the thought, a cold dread creeping up her spine. She forced herself to take a breath. He was just angry. This was his way of getting back at her, a dramatic tantrum. Where could he have gone? Back to his parents' house? A friend's place? He was Daniel Johnson, and he was her husband. He couldn't just disappear. This was just a performance, a way to show her how angry he was. He would come back when he cooled down, and when he did, she would talk to him, soothe his ruffled feathers. The thought calmed her just a little. She sent people to the Johnson estate and to all of Daniel's friends, but the answer was always the same. No one had seen him. A day passed, then 2, then 3. Daniel seemed to have vanished without a trace. Sarah's initial confidence slowly curdled into a gnawing anxiety. She sat in the cavernous living room, and for the first time, the grand, empty house felt terrifying. She remembered how Daniel used to fill the vases with fresh lilies, how he'd turn on the soft floor lamps in the evenings and have the kitchen make her favorite tea. Now, there was nothing, only cold, sterile air and a silence that felt like death. Where could he possibly be? Sarah shot up from the sofa, a single thought cutting through her panic. Her mother. Daniel had always been close to her mother. He must have gone to the family estate to tattle on her. Clutching at this last straw, she raced to the Blackwell estate. She burst into the living room, her words tumbling out in a rush. Mother, is Daniel here? Did he come to you? Before she could finish, her mother emerged from her study, her face a thunderous mask, her eyes as cold and distant as a stranger's. She gave Sarah no chance to explain, instead snapping an order to the household staff. Restrain her. 2 large housemen stepped forward and pinned Sarah's arms behind her back, holding her fast. Sarah was completely dumbfounded. Mother? What are you doing? What am I doing? Her mother spat, striding forward and slapping a thick stack of papers across Sarah's face. The sharp edge of the paper sliced her cheek. Is this how you treat Daniel? Letting your bastard child with that degenerate call him father? You played him for a fool for 4 years. Have you no shame? Her mother was shaking with rage, every word a venomous dart. Sarah stood frozen, as if she'd been struck by lightning. Daniel knew. He knew everything. Her eyes fell to the papers scattered on the floor. On top of the pile lay a set of divorce papers. And there, on the final page, on the signature line, was her own name, clear as day. Sarah's pupils contracted. She stared at the signature. Divorce papers? I never signed any divorce papers. Her mother looked at her feigned shock with a cold, bitter laugh, her eyes filled with a pained disappointment. You didn't expect this, did you? Daniel told me everything. He begged me to help him, to get your signature on these papers. Her mother's voice was like ice. Remember last week? When I called you here to sign those urgent company files. These were hidden in that stack. You signed them without a second glance. Is there anyone in the world you think about besides yourself and that worthless Ethan Reed? A buzzing filled Sarah's ears. Her mind went completely blank. She remembered it now. A little over a week ago, her mother had called her to the estate, saying there were some urgent corporate documents to sign. She'd been in a rush, anxious to meet Ethan to look at a new watch, and had scribbled her name wherever her mother had indicated, not bothering to read a single word. So he'd been planning this all along. It wasn't a tantrum. He was really, truly done with her, while she was still putting on a performance. Confident that she had him wrapped around her finger, he had been calmly and meticulously planning his escape, severing every last tie that bound them together. He had known. He'd known Mia wasn't his. He'd known about her and Ethan. He had known about every last lie, every single betrayal, which meant that all of her careful deceptions, all of her masterful performances, had been nothing more to him than a clumsy, pathetic clown show. Sarah stared at the divorce papers on the floor, feeling the entire foundation of her world crumble to dust. A tidal wave of panic, colder than ice, washed over her. She snapped her head up, struggling against the hands that held her. "Mother, where is he?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Where did Daniel go? You have to tell me." Her mother looked at her daughter's frantic, desperate face without a flicker of sympathy. "I don't know." Sarah's voice rose to a near scream. "How can you not know? He always listened to you. He must have told you where he was going. Even if I didn't know, I wouldn't tell you," her mother snapped. "The moment you and that man conspired to humiliate Daniel, you forfeited any right to know anything about his life. The Blackwell family has no room for a treacherous, ungrateful daughter like you, and Daniel deserves a better wife. Now get out. Don't befoul my house with your presence." With a sharp wave of her hand, her mother dismissed her. The housemen released their grip and unceremoniously shoved her out the front door of the Blackwell estate. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her with a deafening thud. Sarah stood on the gravel driveway in a daze. The bright sun beat down on her, but she felt no warmth, only a profound, soul-deep cold. She had no memory of the drive back to her own empty house. She opened the door to the same dead silence. The air itself seemed to hold the memory of that last night, the look of calm despair in Daniel's eyes as Mia shoved him, as the hot water scalded his hand. "Don't you worry. Soon enough, Ethan will be the only father you have." It hadn't been a threat made in anger. It had been his final goodbye. She walked upstairs and found herself standing outside the guest room. As if compelled by some unseen force, she pushed open the door. The room was tidy, but its emptiness was suffocating. She remembered that night, how she had dragged him from his sickbed and accused him of killing the kitten. She remembered how she dismissed his denials, how she had pronounced, with absolute certainty, "You need help." She remembered the sound of his low, bitter laugh as she ordered the butler to lock him in. At the time, she had thought he was being irrational, completely unhinged. Now she understood. That laugh hadn't been madness. It had been the sound of absolute despair, of a man whose heart had finally and completely died. He didn't want her. He didn't want their house of lies. And he didn't want the daughter he had cherished for 3 years. He had left without a word, not a note, not even a text message. He had simply vanished, making a perfectly clean break. Sarah sank to the cold floor, her hands buried in her hair. A tidal wave of regret and terror washed over her, and she let it drown her. Sarah didn't know how long she sat there on the floor. It was the sound of small, shuffling footsteps and Mia's sleepy voice that finally broke the silence. "Mommy? Are you home, Mommy?" Sarah jolted back to reality, hastily wiping the tears from her face as she pushed herself to her feet. She took a deep, steadying breath, schooling her features into a neutral expression before she opened the door. Mia stood there in her pajamas, clutching a lopsided picture frame she had made from construction paper and glitter. Her little face was tilted up, her big eyes shining with anticipation. "Look, Mommy, I made this for Daddy. He's gonna love it. Where's he? Is he still sleeping?" She tiptoed, craning her neck to see into the empty room behind Sarah. The smile on her face faltered. "Mommy," she asked, a confused little frown on her face. "Isn't Daddy in there?" A lump formed in Sarah's throat. She looked at the little handmade frame, so clumsy and yet so full of love, and each tiny sequin felt like a needle piercing her heart. How was she supposed to tell this little girl that the man she had called Daddy for 3 years was never coming back? Her mouth was dry, her voice a rasp. Daddy went on a trip. Mia blinked, confused. Where did he go? Why didn't he take me? When is he coming back? Sarah couldn't meet her daughter's innocent, questioning gaze. She had to look away. She could only deflect, buying time with vague non-answers. He went somewhere very far away. It will be a long time before he's back. Mia's face fell. She clutched her little frame to her chest, her head bowed. But I miss him. I wanted to show him my present. Sarah knelt and pulled her daughter into a hug. The feel of Mia's small, warm body in her arms only made the hollow space in her own chest feel larger and colder. It's okay, sweetie. He'll see it when he gets back, she murmured. The line meant more for herself than for her daughter. After finally getting a distraught Mia to sleep, Sarah stood alone in the vast, silent living room. She looked around. All of Daniel's things were still here. His expensive suits and watches still lined the shelves of his closet. His collections still sat on their display shelves. His favorite books were still piled in the study. He hadn't taken a single thing, leaving his entire life behind in this gilded cage. But to Sarah, the house felt utterly and completely empty. It was no longer a home. It was a beautiful, cold mausoleum, a monument to her own arrogant confidence and her too-late regret. She walked slowly up the stairs and back to the guest room he had occupied. She didn't turn on the lights, letting the pale moonlight illuminate the silent room. She could almost smell the faint, lingering scent of him on the pillows, that scent that was somehow both crisp and warm at the same time. She remembered when he had first moved in, how he had carefully arranged the room, piece by piece. She remembered the countless nights she had come home late, and he would be waiting up for her, just a single dim lamp on beside the bed, a book in his lap. He would look up as she entered, a sleepy but gentle smile on his face. All those little moments she had ignored, the things she had taken for granted. Now they were 1,000 tiny, sharp blades, slicing her heart to ribbons. She had been so sure she was in control, so certain that Daniel would always be there waiting for her whenever she chose to turn around. But now she had turned, and there was nothing behind her but empty space. Sarah collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in the pillow that still held the faintest trace of his scent. Her eyes burned, and a wave of grief and emptiness, as vast and dark as the night sky, swallowed her whole. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, Daniel sat in a bright, spacious office, dressed in a sharply tailored white suit. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he reviewed a new partnership proposal, the document entirely in English. The color had returned to his face, his eyes were sharp and focused, and he radiated an aura of cool competence. He hadn't been like this when he'd first arrived. Though he had projected an image of calm control, managing his new team and taking on projects, he alone knew how many nights he'd woken up from nightmares filled with Sarah's cold accusations, Ethan's smug grin, and Mia's voice, full of hatred, saying, "I hate you, Daddy." The wound in his heart was still raw, still bleeding in the dark, quiet hours of the night. But he refused to let himself drown in it. He poured every ounce of his energy into his work, using the relentless pace as a tool to both numb the pain and reshape himself. The results were undeniable. Free from her influence, he was once again the capable, decisive Daniel Johnson. Within 2 weeks of his arrival, he had already engineered a breakthrough on a major project that had been deadlocked for months, one that headquarters had been ready to write off as a complete loss. He not only secured the impossible deal, but his professionalism and sheer tenacity earned him the respect of the opposing firm. Their lead negotiator, a famously tough woman named Chloe Young, had smiled at him after the signing. "I'm impressed, Mr. Johnson. It's been a long time since I've faced such a worthy adversary." Chloe Young was beautiful and formidable, a rising star in the international business community. She was brilliant, well-connected, and didn't suffer fools gladly. The successful negotiation led to more frequent interactions between her and Daniel. She found that beneath his cool, reserved exterior was a man of surprising resilience and sharp intellect. He was decisive, his business instincts were uncanny, and her professional admiration soon began to blossom into something more personal. One afternoon, just as Daniel was finishing a video conference, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Johnson," his assistant said, "Ms. Young is here to see you." Daniel rubbed the bridge of his nose. Send her in. Chloe pushed the door open, dressed not in her usual power suit, but in a simple charcoal gray dress that softened her sharp edges. She smiled as she settled into the chair across from his desk, her movements fluid and natural. All done for the day? She asked. Daniel dropped his hand, a polite, professional smile on his face. Just wrapped up. Can I help you with something, Chloe? Can't I just stop by to say hello? She arched an eyebrow, her tone teasing and familiar, yet perfectly calibrated to avoid being pushy. I know you're a workaholic, Daniel, but even you have to eat. I know a great new French place that just opened up nearby. Interested? Daniel looked at her, fully aware of the warmth in her invitation, a warmth that extended beyond a simple business acquaintance. He had to admit, Chloe was a captivating woman, and her company was genuinely pleasant. But his heart, he feared, had been frozen solid by 5 years of lies and a final, brutal shattering. For now, there was no sign of thaw. He offered her a polite, distant smile. I appreciate the thought, Chloe, but I really have to finish this report tonight. You still have to eat, she insisted, her tone firm but her eyes kind. Let's call it a celebration for the successful launch of our project's first phase. Humor me, Daniel. She made it difficult to refuse without seeming rude. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right, but dinner is on me, to thank you for all your support on the project. Chloe smiled, understanding he was drawing a line, and she didn't push it. Fine by me, but I'm expensive, she joked as they left the office together. Their relationship had shifted, moving from colleagues to something more akin to friends. Daniel knew what he needed right now was to focus on his career and on healing, not to get entangled in another complicated relationship. Chloe, for her part, was patient. She understood that a man like Daniel needed time and space. Sarah's life, in contrast, was a complete disaster. She had leveraged every contact, called in every favor, practically turned New York City upside down, but there was still no trace of Daniel. It was as if he had simply dissolved into thin air. This total loss of control left her on a razor's edge, prone to explosive fits of temper. At the office, she terrorized her staff, erupting in fury over the smallest mistake. At home, the mere sight of something Daniel had owned would send her into a rage, and she'd smashed several of his favorite vases and art pieces. But afterwards, staring at the debris, she would only feel more empty, more miserable. Mia, too, had become difficult. Children are sensitive, and she could feel the oppressive tension in the house, could sense her mother's volatile moods. She began to act out, crying and throwing tantrums at all hours, screaming the same questions over and over. When is Daddy coming back? I want my daddy. I want him now. You made him leave. It's your fault. Bring him back. Her daughter's relentless accusations were a constant torment. Sarah tried to console her, but nothing worked. Finally, in desperation, she called Ethan. Now, he was the only one who could calm Mia down. Ethan arrived quickly, and when he saw Sarah's drawn, exhausted face, a flicker of pity crossed his face, quickly replaced by the glint of opportunity. He cooed at the distraught child, gathering her into his arms and humming softly until her sobs subsided and she finally drifted off to sleep. Ethan gently placed the sleeping child in her bed, tucking the covers around her. Then he walked back to the living room where Sarah sat on the sofa, her head in her hands, radiating a palpable misery. Sarah, he began, placing a hand on her shoulder. I hate to see you like this. Sarah flinched. Before, she would have welcomed his touch, his sympathy. But now, the memory of Daniel's cold, final departure, contrasted with Ethan's calculated sympathy, filled her with a sudden, inexplicable wave of revulsion. She shifted, shrugging off his hand. Mia esse asleep. You should go, she said, her voice cold and dismissive. Ethan's hand hung in the air for a moment, his smile faltering. Sarah, I just want to stay with you, he began. Don't, she cut him off, her voice sharp with an irritation she couldn't conceal. I need to be alone. Ethan stared at her cold, impassive profile, a mixture of anger and desperation churning inside him. Daniel was gone. Why was she still acting like this? What was so special about that man? He didn't dare press the issue, sensing it would only make things worse. All right, he said, forcing a smile. You get some rest. I'll check on Mia tomorrow. Sarah didn't answer. She just walked into her bedroom and closed the door. The agitation inside her didn't fade. It grew, a fire in her veins. She needed a drink. She stood and walked toward the liquor cabinet. As she opened her bedroom door, she heard a sound from Mia's room. It was Ethan's voice, hushed but perfectly clear. He was still here? Sarah froze, moving silently toward Mia's partially open door. Inside, Ethan was sitting on the edge of Mia's bed, whispering to the little girl, who was now awake and rubbing her eyes. "Mia, don't cry now. Daniel doesn't want you anymore. He's a bad daddy. He doesn't love you. That's why he left you all alone. You shouldn't be sad over a bad daddy like him. He's not worth your tears. But you have me. I'm your real daddy. And a real daddy will love you forever and will never, ever leave you. Mia, listen to me. I need you to go to Mommy and tell her you want me to stay here with you always. Tell her you want me to move in so I can be your real daddy. Can you do that for me?" Sarah stood in the hallway, listening to his poisonous, manipulative words, and a hot rush of blood roared in her ears. A blind, white-hot rage instantly incinerated every last shred of her reason. She threw open the door to Mia's room. The crash of the door against the wall made Ethan jump to his feet, and Mia, now wide awake, began to cry. The color drained from Ethan's face. "Sarah," he stammered. Sarah stormed into the room, her eyes blazing with a terrifying cold fury. She grabbed his wrist in a vice-like grip. "What the hell are you saying to my daughter?" Her voice shook with a rage so profound it was almost primal. "Who gave you the right to say those things to her? She's 3 years old. What are you trying to do, poisoning her mind like this?" I wasn't, Sarah. Please, just let me explain." Ethan tried to plead his case, but Sarah wasn't listening. She threw his hand off with surprising force and pointed toward the door. "Get out of my house. And from now on, you're not to come near Mia ever again without my permission." The raw, violent determination in her eyes shocked him into silence. He knew she meant it. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded and left. Sarah's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. She looked at Mia, who was sitting on her bed, stunned and on the verge of tears, and a profound, weary coldness settled in her heart. For the first time, she saw Ethan read clearly, and he was not the kind, selfless man she had told herself he was. And the chasm that now separated her from Daniel, a chasm carved by her own lies and another man's manipulations, now seemed utterly, hopelessly uncrossable. Ethan was gone. The room was silent, save for Mia's frightened, shallow breaths. Sarah looked at her daughter's terrified little face, and it felt like a physical blow. A thought, like a bolt of lightning in a dark room, suddenly illuminated 100 other things she had chosen not to see. She pushed down her rage and knelt in front of her daughter, forcing her voice to be gentle. "Mia, honey, tell Mommy. Has your godfather ever said things like that before? About Daddy being mean?" Mia was still shaken, her lip trembling, tears welling in her eyes. She looked at her mother, too scared to speak. "It's okay, Mia. Mommy's not mad at you," Sarah soothed. She softened her voice, gently wiping a tear from her daughter's cheek. "You can tell me. Is this the first time he said that?" Mia let out a little sob and shook her head. Sarah's heart plunged. "What else did he say?" she asked, her voice tight with a tension she couldn't control. Mia tilted her head, her little brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to remember. He said, Daddy doesn't love me. That's why he never plays with me or lets me have candy," she said in a small voice. "And he said Daddy was mean and that he killed the kitty on purpose. And that time we went to the amusement park, Daddy promised he would come, but he didn't. Godfather said Daddy is a liar, and he lied to me because he doesn't love me. He said that if I was a good girl and let him be my daddy, he would play with me all the time and buy me all the prettiest dresses." Every word was a hammer blow to Sarah's heart. So that was it. Long before she had any idea, Ethan had been systematically poisoning Mia's mind, planting 1,000 tiny seeds of doubt and resentment. She remembered Daniel mentioning, on more than one occasion, that he felt Mia was growing distant, that sometimes she even looked at him with something like resentment. She had dismissed his concerns, told him it was just a phase, that he was imagining things. She remembered all the times Ethan had casually mentioned how strict Daniel was with Mia, how impatient he could be, and how much it pained him, Ethan, to see it. A cold dread snaked its way up her spine. She had told herself that Ethan loved her, that his little manipulations were harmless. So she had looked the other way, even taking his side in his little squabbles with Daniel. She saw now just how catastrophically wrong she had been. This was far more than petty jealousy. Ethan had been systematically destroying the bond between Daniel and Mia, deliberately erasing Daniel's place in their family. And if he was capable of that, what else had he done? The dead kitten, Daniel's mysterious illness all those years ago, the one that had so conveniently required a blood transfusion that only Ethan could provide, the one that had brought him into their lives and earned him Daniel's unwavering trust. Was any of it a coincidence? Sarah shot to her feet, her face a mask of thunderous fury. She couldn't lie to herself any longer. She had to know the truth. She had to know exactly what other filthy, manipulative games Ethan had been playing while she was blinded by guilt and misplaced loyalty. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number, her voice cold and dead. "I want you to investigate Ethan Reed. I want everything. Start to finish, every last detail. And I especially want to know about all the accidents that have happened around Daniel and Mia." The information came quickly. As she read the final report her investigator delivered, a chilling cold seeped into her bones, leaving her frozen from the inside out. Every word on the page was a poisoned dagger, methodically shredding the last vestiges of her self-deception. The kitten. Ethan had strangled it with his bare hands. The very night she had locked Daniel in his room, Ethan had snuck upstairs, murdered the helpless animal, and placed its body on Mia's bed to frame Daniel. The ripped shirt at the birthday party. Ethan had bribed one of the temporary waiters to treat the seams with a chemical that would dissolve the thread after a few hours. He had timed it perfectly for Daniel's speech, knowing it would be the final, public humiliation. But the revelation that made her tremble so violently she could barely hold the report was the truth about Daniel's transfusion 7 years ago. It hadn't been Ethan's blood. There had been a shortage, but an anonymous donor had been found, a perfect match who had saved Daniel's life. Ethan had somehow found out and bribed one of the nurses. He had her put him in an empty bed next to Daniel's. And when Daniel woke up, Ethan was there, pretending to be weak from his donation. He had stolen another man's good deed and used that stolen valor to insinuate himself into Daniel's life, earning his complete and utter trust. It was that trust that had made Sarah herself see him in a new light. But the final, most monstrous revelation was yet to come. Her first child, her baby with Daniel. Ethan had bribed a doctor to switch their healthy baby with a stillborn infant. The crime had been perfect, undetectable. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. The depth of his depravity was unimaginable. And her baby? Her first child? Sarah slammed the thick file down on her desk, her chest heaving with a rage so profound it stole her breath. Her entire life for the past 7 years had been a meticulously crafted lie. She had been a fool, a puppet dancing on his strings. And because of him, she had hurt, humiliated, and ultimately driven away the only man who had ever truly loved her. An inferno of rage and regret threatened to consume her. She had Ethan brought to her office. He arrived looking confused, a hint of hopeful anticipation on his face, clearly assuming she had cooled down and was ready to reconcile. That hope died the moment she slapped the investigator's report across his face. The edge of the paper cut his cheek. He looked down at the documents scattered at his feet, and the color drained from his face. "Sarah, please, let me explain," he stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "This isn't what it looks like. Someone is trying to frame me." He grabbed for her sleeve, tears welling in his eyes in a familiar, pathetic performance. Sarah ripped her arm away, her expression one of utter revulsion, as if she were looking at something foul. "Are you still acting, Ethan? Even now?" She pointed a trembling finger at the papers on the floor, her voice a low, chilling monotone. "You killed the cat. You ruined the shirt. You even stole the credit for saving a man's life. Is there any line you won't cross?" Seeing the undisguised loathing in her eyes, Ethan knew the game was up. The mask of the wounded victim fell away, replaced by the twisted, sneering face of a cornered animal. He laughed a high, grating sound. "Yes, I did all." "So what?" he snarled. "You think you're any better, Sarah? You loved me, but you married Daniel for your family's precious merger. You forced me and my own daughter to live in the shadows. I was just taking what was rightfully mine. If anyone's to blame, it's that fool Daniel. He deserved everything he got. What right did he have to be your husband? To have my daughter call him daddy?" Sarah listened to his venomous tirade, her fists clenching and unclenching at her sides. She had to stay calm. There was one more thing she needed to know. "And my first baby?" she asked, her voice a raw, strangled whisper. "My baby with Daniel. The one who is stillborn. What did you do with her?" The manic grin on Ethan's face faltered, his eyes shifting with a cruel, triumphant malice. That little brat? I had someone get rid of her. Dumped her in some backwater town. For all I know, she's dead. Sarah's heart stopped. In a single, fluid motion, she lunged forward and grabbed Ethan by the throat, her fingers digging into his flesh with enough force to crush his windpipe, her eyes blazing with a murderous red light. Tell me where she is. Choking, gasping for air, Ethan's face began to turn a dusky purple. The raw fear of death finally broke him. The South, he choked out. A place called Kingston in the mountains, a village. Sarah released her grip, and Ethan crumpled to the floor, a boneless heap, coughing and gagging. She looked down at him, and a last flicker of any emotion she had ever felt for him was gone. In its place was only a cold, dead emptiness. Take him away, she said to the men waiting outside her door, her voice utterly flat. Do to him exactly what he did to Daniel and my child. But don't kill him. I want him to live a long, long time, so he can enjoy it. She needed to find her daughter. She had no more time to waste on this garbage. Her men would know how to punish him. There were a great many fates worse than death. At the same moment, Sarah was launching a frantic, nationwide search for her daughter. Daniel's phone rang. It was Chloe Young. Daniel, I need you to stay calm and listen to me very carefully, she said, her voice tight with urgency. I pulled some strings, did some digging. I found something out. Your first child, the one you had with Sarah. She didn't die. She was switched at birth and abandoned in some remote mountain village. The pen in Daniel's hand skittered across the document he was signing, leaving a long, black gash. He could barely hold his phone. His voice was a strangled, trembling thing. What were you saying? Our first baby? She's alive? Where is she? The intel is still preliminary, but it points to a very remote village in the south. I've had my people do an initial check. The timeline fits, and there's a girl there of the right age. Chloe's words were quick and precise. I've already booked us on the next flight out. I'm coming with you. Daniel didn't hesitate. His daughter, his first child, alive. The news was a blinding flash of light, instantly vanquishing the despair that had been his constant companion for so long. He dropped everything, and within hours, he and Chloe were on a plane back to the States. The entire flight, his fists were clenched so tightly his nails drew blood, but he felt nothing. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm of hope and terror. He was terrified it would be another false lead. He was terrified he would find the wrong child. Chloe sat beside him in silence, her quiet presence a steadying anchor in the storm of his emotions. After a long flight and an even longer, bumpier drive, they finally arrived at the tiny, isolated mountain village. It was a place of profound poverty, the houses little more than shacks, the roads rutted dirt tracks. Following the scant directions they had, they found a small, dilapidated house at the edge of the village. And there, sitting on a rickety stool in the dusty yard, was a little girl in a faded, ill-fitting dress. She looked to be about 4 years old, her face smudged with dirt, her hair lank and colorless. She was bent over, intently scratching patterns in the dirt with a stick. Her face was dirty, her clothes were rags, but in that instant, a primal, paternal recognition seized Daniel's heart, squeezing it tight. A wave of indescribable emotion, a mixture of profound sorrow and overwhelming joy, brought tears stinging to his eyes. It was her. It had to be. He pushed open the creaking gate and stumbled into the yard. The little girl looked up, startled, revealing a small, thin face with features so delicate they seemed to have been carved from porcelain. And her eyes. They were his eyes, wide and clear and utterly innocent. Daniel sank to his knees, the tears he'd been holding back finally breaking free. He reached out a trembling hand, desperate to touch her, but terrified of scaring her away. My child, he managed to choke out. The little girl flinched, shrinking away from the strange, weeping man. Just then, a man and a woman, a farming couple by the look of them, rushed out of the house. They froze when they saw Daniel and Chloe, their faces instantly wary and hostile. Who are you? The man demanded, pulling the little girl behind him. The instinctive, protective gesture and the fact that the little girl, though painfully thin, was clean and her clothes, though ragged, were mended, brought a small measure of comfort to Daniel. They had been kind to her. It was a small mercy in a sea of cruelty. He forced himself to be calm, wiping the tears from his face. He knelt and took his daughter's tiny hand in his. "Hello," he said to the couple. "I'm her father." We spoke on the phone. Before he could say more, a voice, frantic and achingly familiar, cried out from behind him, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and joy. "Daniel." Daniel froze, then slowly, dreadfully, turned around. Sarah was standing at the gate, her clothes rumpled and dusty from travel, her face a mirror of his own, a mask of ecstatic disbelief. Sarah could not believe her eyes. Daniel, the man she had been searching for day and night, the man who had vanished without a trace, was here, in this filthy, backwater village. A wave of pure joy washed over her, and her first instinct was to run to him, to throw her arms around him and pour out all of her regret, all of her longing. But she had taken only a single step before she froze. Daniel wasn't alone. He was kneeling on the ground, holding the hand of a little girl. A tiny, painfully thin little girl in a ragged dress, her face smudged with dirt. But her eyes, the shape of her face, she looked like Daniel. And she looked like her. In that instant, Sarah knew. This was her daughter. Her and Daniel's daughter. The baby she thought had died at birth was alive. The shock was so profound it made her physically stagger. She stumbled forward, her hand outstretched, needing to touch the child, to prove to herself that this was real. "Don't touch her," Daniel snarled, pulling the little girl behind him, shielding her with his own body. He looked at Sarah, his eyes devoid of any warmth, any recognition of their shared past. There was only a cold, hard wall of warning in his gaze. "You don't deserve to touch her." The words were an ice picked to her heart. She saw the raw disgust in his eyes, the fierce, protective set of his shoulders. She saw her daughter peeking out from behind his legs, her eyes wide and frightened, and a tsunami of regret and terror crashed over her. "Daniel, The words wouldn't come out right. She stammered, her voice thick with a desperate, painful urgency. "I'm so sorry. I know I was wrong. I know everything." She took a tentative step forward, her eyes pleading. "I know what Ethan did. I found out everything. He killed a cat. He ruined your shirt. He lied about the transfusion. He switched our baby. He's a monster, and I was a blind, stupid fool to ever trust him." She looked at his impassive face, a new wave of panic rising in her. Her voice dropped to a desperate, broken whisper. "Daniel, please, just give me one more chance. Please. I'll change. I swear I will. I only love you. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, to our daughter. I'll never even look at another man. I swear it." She poured out her confession, her promises, desperate to cling to this one, last miraculous chance. But Daniel just looked at her, his eyes cold and distant, as if she were a mildly annoying stranger he'd just met on the street. Her too little, too late apology was pathetic. Forgive her? After all the lies, the betrayal, the public humiliation, after she had locked him in his room and treated him like a madman, did she really think a simple "I was wrong" could fix everything? She would never understand. She hadn't just broken their marriage. She had systematically pulverized every last shred of love and trust he had for her. And some things, once shattered, can never be put back together. Daniel didn't spare her another glance. He didn't say another word. He simply bent down and, with the infinite care one would use to handle the most precious object in the world, he lifted his daughter into his arms. Then he turned and walked toward his waiting car, his steps firm and unwavering. "Daniel," Sarah cried, starting after him, but a figure moved to block her path. It was Chloe Young. Chloe didn't say a word. She simply stood there, looking at Sarah, her expression calm and unreadable. There was no challenge in her eyes, no hint of victory, just a quiet, impassible strength. Sarah wanted to shove her aside, to run after Daniel and her daughter. But as she watched his retreating back, as she saw the infinite tenderness with which he held their child, as she saw Chloe fall in a step beside them, a perfect, natural fit, her feet felt as if they were nailed to the ground. She could only watch as Daniel settled their daughter into the car, as Chloe slid into the seat beside him. The car pulled away, kicking up a cloud of dust that blurred her vision and carried away the last of her hope. Sarah stood frozen in the dusty road, long after the car had disappeared from view. There was a gaping hole where her heart used to be, and a cold, bitter wind was whistling through it. Daniel didn't immediately return overseas with his daughter. She was so small and had been through so much. He didn't want to traumatize her further by uprooting her again so soon. He rented a quiet apartment in a residential neighborhood to give her time to adjust. Chloe, for her part, cleared her calendar, postponing meetings and canceling engagements to stay with them. She found the best pediatrician and a highly recommended child psychologist to give his daughter a thorough checkup and evaluation. She personally shopped for furniture, clothes, and toys, transforming the sterile apartment into a warm, welcoming home. She even taught herself to cook the soft, simple foods a young child might like. Her presence was a constant source of quiet, unobtrusive support. She was patient, she was kind, and she never once overstepped her bounds. Sarah, on the other hand, became a nightmare. She began a campaign of relentless harassment, showing up outside his apartment building every single day, rain or shine. She brought extravagant gifts, enormous bouquets of flowers, expensive toys, designer watches. She called and texted incessantly, her messages a frantic torrent of apologies, explanations, and finally, pathetic, desperate pleas for forgiveness. "Daniel, I know I was wrong. Please, just give me one more chance. She's my daughter, too. Please just let me see her. I'm her mother." She even managed to get his new, unlisted number and began bombarding it with calls and messages. Daniel stared at the endless stream of frantic, emotional messages on his phone with a weary disgust. Her tears, her apologies, her promises, they were all so cheap, so meaningless. If a simple apology could fix everything, then what are the years of lies, the casual, cruel betrayal? Her pain wasn't born of remorse. It was the petulant whining of a spoiled child who had lost her favorite toy. He blocked her on all platforms and instructed the building's security to never allow her on the premises. But still, she would find ways to appear at the periphery of his vision, a persistent ghost haunting him with the memory of his past. In stark contrast to Sarah's suffocating presence was Chloe's gentle, steady support and his daughter's slow, beautiful blossoming. With Daniel and Chloe's patient guidance, the little girl began to shed her shell of fear and anxiety. She started to laugh. She started to call him Daddy in a soft little voice. She started to explore her new, safe, warm world with a tentative curiosity. And she absolutely adored Chloe. Chloe would hold her for hours, patiently helping her with a difficult puzzle, or just quietly watching the world go by from the window. When nightmares woke her, Chloe would be there to soothe her back to sleep with a soft story. Soon, she was reaching for Chloe, her little arms outstretched for a hug. Watching the natural, easy affection between his daughter and Chloe, seeing the smile that was so often on his daughter's face now, Daniel felt the ice around his own heart begin to thaw, just a little. And in the quiet rhythm of their shared days, he and Chloe grew closer. They fell into a comfortable routine, sitting out on the balcony after his daughter was asleep, talking about work, about the future, about nothing in particular. Chloe never pried into his past. She was simply there, a quiet, supportive presence. Her respect for his boundaries was a balm to his wounded soul. And with her, for the first time in a long time, he felt he could relax. Sarah, however, did not give up. Daniel's rejection only seemed to fuel her obsession, and she began to stalk him in earnest, a constant, menacing shadow on the edge of his new life. The following weekend, the weather was beautiful, so Daniel and Chloe took his daughter to Central Park. She was wearing a new yellow dress and skipped happily between them, holding both of their hands, her face alight with pure joy. They rode the carousel, took pictures in front of the little castle, and Chloe bought her a cloud of pink cotton candy bigger than her head. To any casual observer, they looked like the perfect, happy family. The scene was a dagger in the heart of Sarah, who was watching from behind a nearby group of trees. She saw the easy, relaxed smile on Daniel's face, a smile she hadn't seen in years. She saw the way her daughter looked at Chloe with pure, trusting adoration. A venomous cocktail of jealousy and despair began to poison her blood. That was her husband. That was her daughter. What right did this other woman have to be here? The final straw was when Chloe knelt, gently wiping a smudge of cotton candy from the corner of her daughter's mouth, and Daniel looked on, his face a picture of pure, unguarded affection. In that moment, something inside Sarah snapped. She burst from her hiding place and shoved Chloe with all her might. "Get away from my husband and my daughter," she screamed. Chloe, caught completely by surprise, stumbled backward and fell, scraping her palm on the rough pavement. The sudden violence sent gasps of shock through the crowd of onlookers. Daniel's face hardened. His first move was to scoop up his terrified daughter. His second was to kneel beside Chloe to check on her. He looked up at Sarah's crazed, contorted face, and the dam of his carefully controlled anger and disgust finally broke. As Sarah lunged toward Chloe again, Daniel moved, placing himself between the two women, a solid, immovable wall. His eyes were chips of ice. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and lethally calm. "That is enough." Seeing him standing there, a human shield protecting Chloe, seeing the fierce protectiveness in his eyes for the other woman and the absolute, chilling emptiness when he looked at her, sent a spasm of pure agony through Sarah's heart. "Daniel, I'm your—" she began, but he cut her off. "I am warning you. Leave. Now, or I will call the police." "The police." Sarah laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. Her eyes were wide with a desperate, paranoid disbelief. "You would call the police on me? For her? I don't believe you, Daniel. I don't believe you feel nothing for me. After all our years together." She reached for him again, but Daniel was already pulling out his phone. He looked her directly in the eye as he dialed 911. "Yes, hello? I'm at the Central Park carousel. A woman has just assaulted my friend, and she is continuing to harass and threaten my family. We require immediate assistance." His voice was calm, clear, and precise. Sarah stared at him, dumbfounded, as if he were a complete stranger. She couldn't believe he would be so ruthless, so final. The police arrived quickly. They took statements, reviewed the park's security footage, and confirmed Sarah's assault and ongoing harassment. They took her away in handcuffs. As they put her in the back of the squad car, Sarah looked back one last time. Daniel was kneeling by Chloe's side, gently examining her scraped hand, his daughter held securely in his other arm. He never once looked in her direction. The sight of his back, a solid, impenetrable wall that completely shut her out, was like a bucket of ice water, shocking her into a final, brutal clarity. In that moment, she finally truly understood. He felt nothing for her. Not love, not even hate. Just a vast, chilling indifference. She was nothing to him, and that knowledge was more painful than any public humiliation, a blow that shattered the last of her hope into a million tiny pieces. With matters in the States settled for the time being, Daniel and Chloe had to return to Paris to deal with a backlog of work. Somehow, Sarah found out, and she followed them with Mia in tow. She didn't cause any more violent scenes. Instead, she became a silent, brooding presence, a shadow lingering on the edges of his life. She rented an apartment directly across the street from his and would stand at her window for hours, just staring at the lights in his. She watched him take his daughter to preschool every morning. She watched Chloe come and go from his building as if she lived there, sometimes carrying bags of groceries, sometimes a new toy for his daughter. The sight of their easy, domestic intimacy was a constant, stabbing pain. But still, she refused to give up hope. She had one last card to play, her own daughter. She timed it perfectly, waiting for Daniel outside his daughter's preschool with Mia by her side. When Daniel emerged with his daughter, Sarah gave Mia a little push. "Daddy!" Mia cried, launching herself at Daniel like a lost puppy, her arms clamping around his waist in a desperate grip. "Daddy, I miss you. Please don't leave me. I'm sorry. I know I was bad. I'm so sorry." She sobbed hysterically, her little face red and blotchy, burying her tear-streaked face in Daniel's coat. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, and in that moment of hesitation, Sarah moved in. Her eyes were bloodshot, her composure gone. She stared at Daniel, her voice a raw rasp. "Daniel, look at her. She needs you. We're a family." She reached a hand toward him, then let it drop. "Can we please just start over? I promise. It will just be you from now on. You and our children." Daniel slowly looked up at her. He didn't push Mia away, but he didn't return her embrace either. He just looked down at the child he had once cherished, and the last traces of warmth in his eyes turned to ice. And then he laughed. A cold, sharp, terrible sound. "Have you forgotten, Sarah?" he asked, his voice lethally soft. "Have you forgotten who it was that burned our family to the ground?" His gaze shifted to Mia's tear-streaked face, his voice as cold and clear as a judge's sentence. "You said your godfather was the best. You said I never played with you. You said you hated me." He enunciated each word, slow and deliberate. "Now, you have your wish. From now on, he is your only father." And with that, he gently but firmly pried Mia's fingers from his coat and pushed the hysterical child back into Sarah's arms. "No, Daddy!" Mia screamed, trying to lunge for him again, but the look in his eyes stopped her cold. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was a vast, empty, chilling indifference. Take your daughter, he said, his final glance at Sarah as cold and distant as if she were a complete stranger. And get out of my sight. Don't make me say it again. He turned, took his own daughter's hand, and walked into the building without a backward glance. Behind him, Mia's hysterical sobs and Sarah's desperate cries faded into the city noise. He never looked back. The wind caught the hem of his coat, a silent final goodbye. Sarah stood frozen on the sidewalk, holding the limp, sobbing form of her daughter, and watched him walk away. And in that moment, she finally understood. She had lost him. Forever. 3 years passed. Daniel stood at his window, watching a small figure chase butterflies in the garden below. The timid, frightened little girl from the mountains had transformed into a bright, confident child whose laughter filled their home with light. "Daddy, Mommy's going to teach me how to ride my bike today," his daughter announced, running up to him, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Chloe followed behind her, her eyes soft with affection. For 3 years, she had been a constant, steady presence, her patience and her respect slowly, gently winning Daniel's guarded heart. Just last night, as she had slipped a ring onto his finger, she had told him, "I'm not asking you to forget your past. I just want to give you a future you can look forward to." And as the morning sun streamed through the window, he believed her. An ocean away, Sarah's life was in ruins. Mia was a difficult, volatile child, prone to violent tantrums. Just last night, she had systematically destroyed the living room, her screams echoing through the empty house. "I want my daddy. You have to bring him back." Ethan, now out of prison, had started harassing her again, showing up at her door that very morning. "Sarah, please. We're a family," he pleaded. She had simply closed the door in his face, shutting out his pathetic whining. Her company's stock was in a free fall, and the board had lost all faith in her leadership. She was utterly alone. And then, yesterday, the final ironic blow. She received the news that Daniel was getting married. She went to the wedding, of course, hiding in the shadows at the back of the church. She watched Daniel, handsome in his tuxedo, walk down the aisle holding his daughter's hand. When he smiled at his bride and promised to love her for the rest of his life, Sarah felt the last, tiny, whole part of her heart shatter into dust. Tonight, she woke up screaming from the same nightmare she always had. It was always the same. Daniel, looking at her for the last time, his eyes as cold and empty as a winter sky. There were 2 picture frames on her nightstand. One was of her and Daniel on their wedding day, his arms around her, both of them smiling. The other was a photo she had secretly taken last year. Daniel, Chloe, and their daughter at a picnic, the 3 of them laughing in the sun. Her hand trembled as she reached for the picture, and she knocked over her wine glass. The dark red liquid spread across the nightstand like a pool of blood, staining the happy family photo and the barren wasteland of her future. It was late autumn in Paris, the plane trees lining the Seine a cascade of gold. Daniel pushed a stroller while Chloe held the hand of their 8-year-old daughter. "Daddy, look," their daughter cried, her face alight with joy. "The baby smiled at me." Daniel and Chloe exchanged a smile, the gentle breeze from the river ruffling his hair and clearing away the last of the old shadows. Some wounds do eventually heal, and some happiness is worth fighting for. And for those who cast aside a treasure in favor of a cheap imitation, their only reward is a lifetime of regret. And perhaps, in the end, that is the only true justice love has to offer.